Hi, everyone. I'm Marcy from CoGenerate, and just want to welcome you today. For those of you who regularly attend our webinars, it's great to see you again. And if you're a first timer, it's wonderful to have you here. For those who are new to us, CoGenerate brings older and younger people together to solve problems and co-create a better future. CoGenerate is the name of our organization. It is also a word that we've begun to use to describe the idea of older and younger in collaboration. After today, we hope you will all be using that word as you go around your business. Our panel today will be led by Gara LaMarche, who is a senior fellow at CoGenerate. He's been a supporter and a good friend to our organization for many years. We're really lucky to have Gara in our midst. Gara is a major force in the fields of human rights and social justice. He served in senior leadership positions at the Atlantic Philanthropies, the ACLU, Human Rights Watch, and the Open Society. He is a prolific writer with bylines in such places as the New York Times, the Washington Post, and The Nation. Today, he's a senior advisor for the Raben Group and teaches at NYU and at the Colin Powell School for Civic and Global Leadership at City University of New York, my city. He's a veteran teacher, but he is just as eager to learn, especially from younger leaders, which you are going to hear more about in just a few minutes. Before handing it off to Gara, my colleague Duncan will share just a few words about the tech for today and your role in this webinar. So Duncan, take it away.
Thanks so much, Marcy, and thank you so much to everyone here, especially our panelists. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Just a few notes on tech. Thanks so much to everyone who's already participating in the chat box. We also have a Q&A module on today's webinar, so we will be monitoring both the chat and Q&A, but we'll be more likely to answer your question if it's in the Q&A box. That said, as you've been doing, we highly encourage you to use the chat for comments, questions for other participants, and to connect with folks on the call. So make sure to set your chat to send to everyone in case you have it set just to send to panelists. Secondly, we are recording this session, and we're going to be including the recording in our follow-up email, along with links to more information about the panelists, anything else we mentioned on the call. And I know that some folks on the call might be using screen readers and have trouble engaging with the chat. We're going to include links there, but we'll include them in the follow-up email as well. So don't worry about trying to switch back and forth. And finally, we do have automatic closed captions available. If you'd like to show or remove those, you can select show or hide captions on the toolbar, and that's it.
Thanks, Marcy, and hi, everybody. Good afternoon to everybody. It's afternoon in most of the places, I guess, where somebody would be listening. Those of you who know me may think my voice sounds a little strange, and that's because I'm kind of flirting with laryngitis, and I'm feeling a little strange, being somewhat less voiced than I usually am, but I'm going to do my best to make it through the next hour or so. And I'm really thrilled about the opportunity to share the work that we've been doing at Encore, at CoGenerate, with all of you. On that note, let me just say my own history is I used to be the president of Atlantic Philanthropies, which is a foundation that was concerned, among other things, with successful aging. At the time when I was leading Atlantic, aging didn't seem as personal to me as it is in subsequent years become. But I was very impressed with Mark Friedman, the leader, and the work of what was actually then called Civic Ventures. And one of the things we funded was a project called the Purpose Prize, which identified older people who were had a project moving on from their existing career to some kind of social entrepreneurship in their later years, and it was designed to tap into the creativity and entrepreneurship of older people, but also had a broader purpose, which was to kind of counter the public narrative about aging, and to make sure that people understood that at every stage of life, people can be creative and have new ideas and open up new horizons. And that made a big impression on me, and the organization did. And I followed the evolution of the organization over the years. I was privileged to be asked to be a senior fellow at what was then called Encore.org. And in the course of my time with Encore, it changed its name to CoGenerate, because the way the work at Encore evolved was in a cogenerational direction, not just And you're starting out from a place that recognized the potential of older people, to understanding that all generations needed to work together for social progress, and that we were in this world, in this society, in our society anyway, it's not true of every society in the world, very age segregated. Indeed, not only was there age segregation, but some conflicts among generations. So what I wanted to do was to kind of lift up the concept of cogeneration in the world in which I come from, the kind of social justice, human rights world, philanthropic world, if you will. Now, this week has been interesting to me, because when you start paying attention to a concept like cogeneration, you see it everywhere, And I want to start out by saying that Harry Belafonte died yesterday, who a few of us knew. Wade Henderson was the director of the Leadership Conference for Civil Rights when I was privileged to get the Hubert Humphrey Award in the same year as Harry Belafonte. And that was one of the first times that I met him. But the thing I want to call out about Harry Belafonte, who was both a just prodigious performer, but also a social justice warrior, is that I know many, many younger people, generations or two below him, who felt that Harry Belafonte was a mentor to them, and who felt that Harry Belafonte felt very keenly the need to identify younger talent and help lift them up and work with them and learn from them. So I think in the spirit of Harry, I want to launch our discussion this afternoon. And also in the couple of things I've read in the past week, the New York Times Magazine devoted its whole T section this weekend, glossy magazine, to intergenerational pairs of women artists who were working together, and along the lines of Joni Mitchell and Brandi Carlile in that wonderful performance from last summer. And then I read in my alumni magazine at Columbia about a course that's being taught in Columbia by an undergraduate with a professor. And so if you look for them, cogenerational models are everywhere and proliferating, and the work of CoGenerate's had a lot to do with that. So I came to CoGenerate as a fellow in order to run a kind of a pilot project about this. And I had a couple of focus groups in which some of the people on this call participated in, to try to understand, what was going on cogenerationally in the world of social justice and human rights and social change advocacy, and also to try to do more to kind of lift the concept up in those worlds. Because my feeling was that while those of us on the progressive side have come to embrace the concept of intersectionality, that is to say, the way multiple identities play out and reinforce one another, it's rarely been the case that age and generations have been in the consciousness of intersectionality. And I wanted to kind of do a little bit more to make that so. So we, in my fellowship, I invited, 7 other people, along with the CoGenerate staff, to participate in a kind of a pilot project. We had a big meeting at the end, at the beginning, a big meeting at the end, and in between, pairs of activists from different generations had conversations with one another. And those people were Wade Henderson, who's on the call, the former president of the Leadership Conference for Civil and Human Rights, and Aisha Yusuf, who is the director of innovation at Impact Justice in California, a criminal justice reform group. Regan Ralph, the now former president of the Fund for Global Human Rights, and Austin Thompson, who at the time we started this was working for SpaceX, and who used to work for me at the Democracy Alliance, running a youth engagement project. Samuel Rubin, who is the co-founder and impact officer of the Hollywood Climate Summit, and me, we had a pair together. And then Nan Aaron, the former president of the Alliance for Justice, and Allison McCrary, who's on our call, who's a nonprofit consultant, a social justice lawyer, a movement builder, community mediator, and spiritual director. So these 4 pairs met together over the course of a couple of months. Then we came back and tried to share some of the lessons that we learned from that. And I'm in a moment, what I want to do is open up to my fellow panelists and ask them some questions about what they learned from that experience. 2 other things I want to mention as we get into this. One is, we don't pretend to have all the answers here. This little project, small as it was kind of a seed planting initiative. We're not even sure where we're going to take it from here. This is the first step, actually, in opening up a wider conversation about it. We have a lot of folks with us on the call who have expressed at least an interest in this and may themselves have experiences and aspirations toward cogenerational work. And we invite you into this process to work with CoGenerate to try to take this work forward. And the second thing I want to say is that there will be a time at the end where we really invite and welcome audience participation and the questions and the comments that each of you have. We're going to be taking a look at that in the chat as we go along. And as soon as we have a robust kind of list of questions, comments, people's hands are raised, we're going to open it up to you. And we encourage you during the course of this to use the chat function for your questions or for your comments, because this is a joint learning experience. As in the project that we have just concluded, the learning runs in both directions. So I want to start out with a question from my old friend, Wade Henderson. Whenever we're together, we kind of go down the memory lane hole of the days when I was running the ACLU in Texas, and Wade was the associate director, I think, of the ACLU Washington office, and we drove around Texas in my battered Volkswagen in the 1980s. So Wade, you're one of the first people I thought of when we started this, partly because you have yourself been such a terrific partner to people in different generations, but on both ends of that spectrum, when you were younger and now that you're older. So most intergenerational relationships that we're familiar with seem mostly one way, with the elder dispensing advice to the younger. And you've described your teaching relationships, because you also, over the years, but particularly since leaving Leadership Conference, have been teaching. You've described that those relationships as running that way, as indeed a lot of teacher relationships do, and the challenge of trying to break out of that paradigm, which isn't always easy. So were you able to do that with Aisha too, this process? What were you looking to learn from her, and what do you think you did learn?
Well, Gara, thanks for that question. And let me make 2 quick points, and then I'll answer the question. How's that? So first, let me say how much I appreciate your raising the memory of Harry Belafonte. If anyone exemplified the principles of CoGenerate, it's Mr. Belafonte. And if anyone demonstrated the value of intergenerational conversation, I think Harry Belafonte is the person. So I'm so pleased you did that. Second, let me set a little context for the conversation, because, obviously all times in which people live are challenging to those who live them. But in the midst of change, it's often difficult to have a true perspective on what is going on. I was reminded of that recently in commemorating the 55th anniversary of Dr. King's assassination. And I remembered that just a few days before he was killed, Lyndon Johnson, the most pro-civil rights president since Abraham Lincoln, announced that he would not seek another term because of the Vietnam War. The country was aflame because of King's assassination. And yet 2 months down the road in June, Bobby Kennedy was killed, snuffing out a really idealistic campaign for the presidency. Fast forward, we had an hellacious Democratic convention that summer that left the country totally frazzled and ushered in the election of Richard Nixon on the backs of his very racist Southern strategy. So all of that happened when I was 20 years old. If ever there were a time for the perspective of those who had lived before, I could have valued that. Fast forward to where we are today. I'm not going to elaborate substantially on that, but American democracy, for those of us who live in this country and even beyond, is hanging precariously. I mean, we just obviously had the January 6th insurrection that is perhaps, the most troubling circumstance we've seen, but perhaps a prelude to the future. And, it heralds the rise of some very significant new trends that are particularly problematic. Christian nationalism and the rise of white supremacy in this country. So we're looking at challenges today, and I'm talking now about the young generation emerging in leadership, of a degree to which we haven't seen collectively before. Hate crimes and anti-Semitism on the rise, abortion limits in construction, backing away from a 50-year grant of rights, gun violence and mass murders. An 8% rise, by the way, since 2020, which was itself a record year for mass shootings, and climate change and immigration. And, I could go on. But the challenges faced by this generation warrant the kind of program, the pilot program that you helped put together, you and Marcy. So I want to credit you guys for having done that. Now, the answer to your question is, did I get what I had hoped out of it? Well, to a degree, I did. First of all, let me complain about the time. The time was too short. We had 2 meetings between the partners after having an introduction, which was great, but it wasn't enough time to develop a rapport that allowed us to really engage in a way that I thought would have been more helpful. So the answer to the question is, look, I had to break out of my own sense of being the mentor, not the mentee, and thinking about what I wanted to see from this conversation. But I had something very specific, and I got to it, but not in the way that I had hoped. I personally think that voting is really the language of democracy. And if you don't vote, you don't count. And we leave too many votes on the table. I'm talking about progressives. And I'm interested in getting insights about how we tap into that population, not currently engaged, but potentially gettable for something that really is big and meaningful. And I looked to Asada Youssef, who was my partner, and a brilliant young woman, VP for innovation and impact at a grassroots criminal justice reform organization, Impact Justice, also one of the big issues of the day. But what I wasn't able to do from my perspective was to tap into what I looked for. I wanted insight into how a network of organizations engaged in voting rights and voter mobilization might be in touch with one another to think through strategies that help maximize the level of turnout that we get in the next election cycle. It's going to be so critical that making that effort is necessary. And so I only got some of that from the relationship. My last point is this. I think in such a short time, one of the things that I had hoped to do, and was successful in doing, was introducing Ashada to someone in her city that might be helpful to her as a potential mentor down the road. She's in Oakland, California. And Angela Glover Blackwell agreed to have a conversation with her. Angela, for those on the call who don't know her, is really a force of nature, an extraordinary activist in her own right, former foundation head, and head of an organization in Oakland, whose name, of course, I just forgot, that is fantastic.
Policy Link.
Yes, Policy Link. So putting her in touch with Ashatu was something that I thought I could do in a concrete way. And I hope to have conversations down the road to further develop the question that I thought was necessary. So I'll stop.
Thanks a lot, Wade. As one of the older panelists, along with me, you're going to be appalled to realize that I did the math when you were talking about 1968, which I also remember. I was 13, and I was as one of the few people. I was a very nerdy, geeky kid to predict that LBJ wouldn't run again. From the standpoint of younger people on the phone, 1968 is as 1913 would have been to you and me at that time. So that's a very scary thought exercise. I want to get to Allison and to Sam, and I want to invite each of you, and I'll start with Allison. I have a question, but I also want to invite you to do what Wade has done, I think very interestingly, is to kind of just frame it in terms of the way you see the world, because I think Wade has really done us a service in kind of linking this exercise, not just to the pairs, but to the larger social context. And I really invite Allison and Sam to do the same if they wish to. So Allison, you were paired with Nan Aaron, and you described your talks with her as helping you refill your tank, which was running on low and near empty, which is a kind of an occupational hazard of social justice work, I'm afraid. She helped you deal with structure, your own capacity, and sustainability. So, I'd love you to elaborate on that, and also, again, give us any broader context in which you see this effort.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me on here. It's an honor to be here among two wise, experienced elders that I've reverenced in this work. And yeah, meeting with Nan Aran, she's embodied what Dr. Martin Luther King said of, the arc of justice is long, but it bends towards justice. And as a younger person, doing justice work, and I've been doing it for 20 years, so I'm not quite that young, but younger than a lot of my mentors and elders in the work. Seeing someone who has been doing it for so long, and getting her wisdom and advice, and figuring, just the reminders, like things that we know in our bodies and our minds or in our hearts, but getting those reminders of, you can't run on an empty tank, and you need capacity to keep doing what you're doing. And you can't do the work that you're doing if you don't know, what's going to come in 3 months in terms of your income. Like, you have to have stability and set up structures for stability. And those reminders when we're doing a lot of rapid response and emergency social justice movement work. I work as a social justice movement lawyer. I do a lot of conflict resolution and mediation and restorative justice. A lot of those are kind of like emergencies, like in the heat of the moment. When Alton Sterling was murdered, or when the BP oil spill happened. I live in New Orleans, Louisiana, where front lines for climate change and a lot of social movements and social change. And so we have to be ready to respond and to be able to cultivate our practices that keep us grounded and rooted. So when those experiences come, we can respond from that solid foundation that we have. And working with younger people who come to me as, wanting to do internships or looking to me as a mentor, there's a lot of individualism that the United States creates. And one of my mentors is Bill Quigley, who's a social justice lawyer out of Loyola University in New Orleans, a law professor. And he was interviewing Father Dan Berrigan, who was an anti-war pacifist and a Jesuit priest. And he said, Father Dan, a lot of us look to you as our hero. Who are your heroes? And Dan Berrigan said, I don't believe in heroes, I believe in community. And so there's no solo acts in this justice work. And even if some of us, have the privilege of working from home or doing consulting work or flexibility with what we do, we always need community to do it. And so how are we ever expanding the community that supports us and grounds us in this work, and where we find mutuality and doing that in intergenerational relationships? I find that most of the people I'm working with on a daily basis are in their 70s, 80s, and 90s. I was a Catholic nun for 14 years, so I still have a lot of relationships with the Catholic sisters in doing a lot of the work that I do, and really being able to benefit from their wisdom and looking at a deep time perspective. A lot of the work that I do around criminal justice reform, poverty, healthcare, education rights, civil rights, voting rights, a lot of those are the same issues that, they're like, Allison, we were working on those in the 1970s. They're not going to go away. You don't need to lose sleep over it. Keep working at it, but sustain yourself while doing it. And so I feel privileged to have the wisdom of elders and mentors in the work, and also in being able to support a lot of young people in their 20s who are wanting to do similar work, and finding a way for them to plug in, to join communities that are doing meaningful social movement work, and building power and shifting power, and thinking about how we do that.
Thanks. I have a lot of admiration for many Roman Catholic nuns. My aunt was a Sister of Mercy for 75 years until she died last year. And I was really struck at her memorial, her funeral, by how the community came together around her. And one of the things that was poignant to me is that, at least with respect to many Roman Catholic orders, the intergenerational balance is getting a little out of whack. There aren't as many of the younger, to learn from the elders. But it's I really have a lot of admiration for their social justice commitment. Sam, it's good to see you again. And I loved our conversations, and I was struck by the honesty of those conversations and how much time we spent shooting the breeze and getting to know one another, which, to Wade's point, seems important in any relationship. And maybe we didn't quite allow enough time for the relationship building in this kind of speed dating exercise that we put together, but nevertheless we were able to make some connections. So again, I'd ask you two questions. One is about the larger frame. You work on climate work. The urgency that that Wade talked about is more present there than probably any other issue that we're dealing with, and seems to be to underscore the imperative of experiments like this. And also, what is it that surprised you about our conversations? At the risk of having you say you were surprised by how stupid I was.
No, absolutely not. The other way around, because we actually got connected thanks to Marcy before of this pilot. I have been on the CoGenerate ecosystem for a few years now because I'm very passionate about intergenerational innovation and movement building. And I remember that when Marcy told me about you and she was like, oh my God, you need to talk to Gara, you need to connect with him. I was like, imposter syndrome, like, oh my God, this person has done so many cool things and has such an extensive background. And the first time that we connected, I just did what I do when I get nervous and insecure. I just started rambling and rambling. And then after the call, I was like, this person is not going to call me or tell me anything ever again. He's going to ghost me and disappear. And then you reach out and we're like, let's talk again. And that was my first surprise. And I think it speaks to the vulnerability that you bring to intergenerational movement building. No? You are saying that you are worried that I'm going to be surprised at how boring you are. And I'm worried that you're not going to, like, there is so many misconceptions, so many false assumptions. And I want to start to also by expressing my gratefulness, obviously, for being here and also for giving a shout out to Harry. I didn't know him personally. Obviously, his work is such a staple in the progressive movement, but I actually am good friends with his daughter, Chari Belafonte, who is amazing. And I think to speak to cogeneration itself is like every generation has a very different understanding of the society that they are a part of. And there is such a beautiful richness in bringing those perspectives together and being vulnerable with our fear, our expectations, and what we believe feels right, because we have different morality compasses. And the compass in 1968 is very different than the one in 2023. So I personally felt very grateful to be able to be in conversation with you, who also is a white cis man in America, and we have that in common, even though that in my case, I'm originally from Barcelona and I'm Hispanic. My family, I'm 5th generation American. And I was very interested in learning more about your experience as an educator and interacting with the students and what the reality of your identity, how has it changed your ability of get shit done or connect with different stakeholders and be able to get the support and coalition building that it requires when you are in the progressive movement doing the work you do, no? And a lot has changed probably for someone like you when you were in your late 20s to me doing similar work in my late 20s. And so our different understandings of intersectionality, even though that they were very aligned in the big picture, it was very interesting to hear about your experience and also to reflect on what you were saying earlier too, that age is a very important intersectionality layer that quite often is forgotten in the mainstream discourse, because we think that intersectionality is just the color of your skin, when in reality, then you look at many different racial, ethnic demographics, and when you look at the age groups, that's precisely when you see the biggest polarization and difference in opinion. So I personally felt that it was a very productive 2 sessions to have with you, in part because similar to Alison's work with relational organizing and community building, I'm a social impact producer. In my case, I leverage entertainment, content, media for advancing progressive social justice issues, specifically the climate justice movement. But at the end of the day, media and storytelling is human stories. And a lot of the work and inspiration that we get is from relational organizing. And developing personal relationships that guide you through the challenges that you face. And even though that maybe that was just a 2-hour session, that's precisely to the challenge that we all have in this very busy, hectic society. Is how do I self-monitor my time? How do I create boundaries? Is this person someone that I'm connecting with? Does this person deserve my time? In your case, Gara, you did. Congratulations, we can spend time together. But maybe I speak with you and I'm realizing, no, this person and I don't actually really click. We have lots of interesting insight, but not necessarily a fit. And how do I navigate that maybe uncomfortable moment or disconnect to also learn how to, support each other, even if we are not going to be best friends, if that makes sense, which I think in intergenerational movement building, we need to work more, lean into that discomfort and lean into disagreement, and practicing active listening helps a lot with that.
Well, one of the things that I was struck by, Sam, in our conversations is the kind of intentionality with which you approached it. And so, I teach a class on authentic and adaptive leadership at New York at the Colin Powell School, and I have 12 MPA students, and I have them read books. But most of my students are younger people of color. They're generally immigrants. They're first generation higher education. Most of them are working while they're going to school. And I have found that the stories of women of color who have become leaders, the kind of autobiographies of them are really useful and resonate a lot with these students. So I assigned 3 books, one by Representative Pramila Jayapal, one by Stacey Abrams, the other by Alicia Garza, one of the co-founders of Black Lives Matter. And all 3 of them actually have also been very gracious in talking to my class on Zoom, which is terrific for them. And one of the things they learned from Stacey Abrams is that she talks about, finding mentors wherever she can, in all kinds of different ways. It doesn't have to be a formal relationship. And she can learn a lot from people who may not be that much like her, and I think it makes a big impact, I think, on a lot of my students. But she went about it with great intentionality when she was younger in particular. And so I find did you, and so has Aisha too, and some of the younger participants in the project. On the other end of the spectrum, I find myself that I was looking forward and constantly looking forward to learning from younger people. And I think one of the kind of casualties maybe of the pandemic, or it's made it more difficult in the pandemic, is that in workplaces, we're not often together as much anymore. And the kind of organic relationships that might develop don't have an opportunity to develop as much. You have to be much more intentional about it. And I find one of the things I worry about a little bit as I myself get older, is that I've always headed institutions which were primarily populated by younger people, and often institutions which had fellowship programs. And Allison was, I believe, a Soros Justice Fellow. Is that right? Or even Equality Fellow, Soros Justice Fellow. Yeah. And as a program that was started when I launched the U.S. programs at Open Society about 25 years ago. And over the years, I formed a lot of relationships with these younger leaders and people at the very beginning of their careers, the Brian Stevensons and the Michelle Alexanders and Vanita Guptas of the world, who in their 20s were people I had an opportunity to meet because they were in our midst. And whatever they've learned from me or other people they've been exposed to, they've shaped my thinking and consciousness in a lot of ways. And I think that one of the reasons we need to be much more intentional about this intergenerational, cogenerational stuff is because, particularly as many of us get older, there are fewer organic opportunities for that to happen, so you have to kind of work at it. I want to ask you a question, put a little more provocatively than some of the questions I've had so far. And that is, one of the settings in which this takes place is a world all over the place, but particularly in the social justice world, that's had some significant intergenerational tension. Some of it's been around movements like climate, where younger generations look at the older folks and say, you had your day, the world is burning up, you had your chance, get out of the way, let us do it. I'm just overstating that probably, but That's an attitude you hear sometimes about a lot of issues, you know, that the boomer generation has kind of screwed up the world, and they need to kind of make way for younger people. But also in a workplace context, you often have, you know, a generation that's older, maybe my generation, Wade's generation, who looking at these tensions. And I didn't think these tensions were much on display in our own project, but I do think they exist in the larger world, you know, where there's a kind of a toughen up attitude from veteran organizers. Kim Fellner, my friend and veteran labor organizer, has written about this. And there's a self-care focus, or a greater self-care focus of next gens, you know, so you have suck it up versus, you know, take care of yourself and focus on your own needs. Does that tension resonate with you? Have you seen that? And do you see a way of squaring those attitudes? Am I overstating it? I'd love some comments on that.
You directed that to me, Gara?
No, I directed to everybody,
Oh, okay.
but you're welcome to take a crack at it.
No, let me defer to my colleagues, but I have some thoughts.
Yeah, I definitely, that does resonate, Gara, what you said. I do hear that sometimes, and it's hard sometimes that when I'm in a space where I'm a younger person, like when I was with the Catholic sisters, and it was, you know, 900 of them, and I was the only one under 70 years old out of 900. And, you know, I had 900 women telling me, oh, you give us so much hope for the future. You're the hope for the future of this tradition that's more than 1,000 years old. You're hope for the future of this institution of the Catholic Church. You're the hope for social justice movements. And it's like a lot of pressure. And it's like, no, I'm not, you know. I just feel called to this. And so it's a lot of pressure on that end. I think younger activists and organizers and movement builders and creators are more focused on self-care. I think they see the reality of burnout. They want to know how to sustain themselves in the long haul for this work. And I think there's a lot that our elders and mentors can teach us on how to do that well. In terms of reaching out to mentors and elders, you know, in this time where we don't naturally or organically cross paths as much, I think we have to get out of our homes. We have to get in community. We have to be in relationship. You know, I'm grateful for the program that we had over the past year, but it was only just, you know, two Zoom meetings, and so it was very different. Whereas the mentors that I have in my day-to-day life, you know, I go for a walk almost every Saturday morning with Bill Quigley. I like intentionally reach out to them, maintain relationship. Marcy, I consider you as one of my elders. She's one of our co-hosts here at CoGenerate, and she reaches out to me regularly, and I feel so bad for not reaching out more, but it's that intentional, consistent reaching out and connecting. And it's not just, you know, some mentors train me, you know, they teach me practical skills, how to do movement lawyering well, how to listen well to organizers and take the lead from organizers on how to build and shift power and how to support that work as a movement lawyer. Some of them, it's connections and relationships. They have people I should know who can help grow the work, and we can mutually support and do the work more effectively by knowing each other. And sometimes it's just that ongoing, you know, emotional, psychological support in doing this work that sustains us long term. And so I think there's different types of mentors at different chapters of life and different areas of our work that we do, and having that intentionality, like you said, Gara, around that, and also that consistency in reaching out in a time and age where we don't naturally cross paths. So every Sunday I'm in Congo Square here in New Orleans, and a lot of my elders in the cultural community, who are also a lot of my legal clients, are out there, and those they sustain me spiritually. The elders in my church sustain me spiritually. Knowing where you get that support. I'm also a spiritual director. I've been doing spiritual direction on death row in Louisiana for 18 years, but I also see people outside of that. And most of my clients for spiritual direction are activists and organizers, abolitionists, folks who are doing restorative justice, you know, 30 years ago before it was a popular thing. And they're looking for community, they're looking for meaning, they're looking for relationships. I feel like that's kind of a radical countercultural thing to do in this individualistic society, where you can go all day without physically being in the presence of someone. But it's really that energy. And I think it's that energy of people coming together, where spirit really comes alive and we incarnate the movement. I call it a sacrament. It's making sacred this energy that comes together when we go out into the streets together, and when we exercise our First Amendment rights, when we exercise democracy, and what that looks like. And that is to be reverenced, and it is sacred. And I fear that we might be losing that we have to understand our relationship with technology and how it helps and hurts those relationships.
I love that way of looking at it, and I love the kind of reclamation, which I think comes naturally to you, given your past and your origins of words, sacrament, grace, whatever, that are often, have an originally religious context, but even for those of us who are fairly secular, they're concepts that are really important to kind of embrace. Sam or Wade?
Yeah, I would like to add that, I totally agree with what you contributed, Alison, and I was thinking on how the burnout and the self-care and all those considerations, confidence, that's all different themes under mental health. And I think that the conversation around mental health, again, now is also very different than it was 60, 70, 80 years ago. I have a lot of times conversations, like I've been to like 9 different therapists in my life already before being 30. And my grandfather is 83, has never been in a therapist in his whole life. And he just moved from the US to Spain, changed his entire life all of a sudden. And there are obviously symptoms that he's experiencing that I can see from the outside, having worked on my emotions and my mental health, like, oh, you might be experiencing depression, or you might be experiencing anxiety, or maybe grief, but no, I'm fine. Blah, blah, blah. And I think that it's just a lack of being given the opportunity of having the time and capacity to work on those emotions, which for me has been a privilege, and for me has been the consequence of also having parents that when I was literally 12, they were like, let's put our kid to a therapist, and I think that was a good choice. But my grandparents obviously didn't have that reality. So I think it's about embracing different realities and knowing that, in a lot of leadership models, I like that you teach a class on authentic leadership. I was learning about the Gemini model not too long ago, and I was surprised to see that care means aligning with others, because I wouldn't have put alignment and caring together. And with that notion in mind, self-care is in a way, in order for you to align with others, you have to be well with yourself. And that's something that in the new era of capitalism, where everyone wants to have so many things, everyone wants to be everywhere, everything has FOMO, you really have to self-monitor yourself and know what is truly aligned with your values, what is aligned with your path, what is that you actually need versus what you don't need, and making those decisions then will allow you to be in a good place for caring of others.
Wade.
Yeah, I would just add a couple of points. First of all, Alison, thank you for sharing your advice about engagement in the community, which is such an important part of it. Brian Stevenson uses the word proximity to sort of describe what is needed in terms of these relationships. And I completely agree that part of any effort engages at that level. But Gara, part of your question goes to the issue of why do heads of organizations, older workers, stay so long? Why are they unwilling to really step aside to create new space for those who come behind? I guess I would say a couple of things. One, as an older worker, I appreciate the fact that often heads of organizations are earning their highest income in the course of their careers. And there is no soft landing for them, no ability to really transition out of what they are doing into creating space for those who come behind, but at the same time providing some softer landing financially and engagement perspective, from an engagement perspective, that might make that transition happen more quickly. So I do think that's a separate issue, but I hope at some point it becomes a point of conversation. I also think there is no higher responsibility than to help facilitate an orderly transition in terms of the work that you're doing. You know, I left the leadership conference the first time in 2017, and I was thrilled that Vanita Gupta, now the number 3 person at the Department of Justice, stepped in behind me because of a very orderly transition process in which a search committee looked carefully at the requirements of the position and sought to expand on it and did an outstanding job. Vanita was tremendous. When she went into the government, I was asked to come back for 18 months to be the interim president, to be succeeded by Maya Wiley, who is extraordinary and doing an absolutely phenomenal job. What makes me proud is that I had some hand in facilitating the transition in a way that kept the organization foremost in my thinking about what was needed and how to be helpful. And I think to the extent that supporters of these organizations can help address that question, it will help create opportunities for new leadership to emerge, which in both instances with Vanita and Maya have been tremendous in helping to advance the interests of the organization. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think I'm glad that you opened it up to the kind of larger, if you will, structural considerations, because I felt for a while, once my consciousness was raised by the work that what's now called CoGenerate was doing, I began to think in the world in which I operated that there was a challenge. I think this has changed a bit, Wade, but 10 or 15 years ago, I felt there were all these older leaders, most of them white men, but not all of them, you know, who seemed to be staying kind of a long time, and a young pool of talent that was kind of facing a bottleneck, you know? And I think very often there's a tendency to say, well, why aren't these people moving on? But as you say, very often, you know, they're in jobs, they still have a lot to contribute, and they fear kind of stepping into the void. And very often, you know, financially, they're not able to do so because these nonprofit leadership jobs, these movement jobs don't always pay very well. So I thought when I had access to $4 billion of a foundation that I would start a fellowship for people to help older social justice leaders with a bridge fellowship. And I thought that was a great idea. And I'm sorry I never got around to doing it when I had a big checkbook. But one of the things that's happened is that I've noticed, and this is a terrific thing, that in the social justice world, there's been a lot of generational change lately. And that generational change has often been to women of color. And the task now, I think, is to make sure that those leaders are supported properly and able to be successful in their jobs, get all the supports from their boards and from everybody else, from funders, you know, that they need. I want to ask you a final question before I turn it back to Marcy for some final comments. And this comes from Kerry Homestead, one of the people in the audience. And it has to do, I think, with something we haven't really lifted up until recently quite enough in this conversation. This work, she says, takes building a lot of understanding regarding pace and urgency, race, culture, and diverse generational perspectives, experiences, and barriers. What are some of the approaches and ways that you have built such understanding and bridges, you know, in your own work? Or what are your ideas for that? I'd like to ask each of you, if you care to take a crack at that as we wind this down and take it home. And Marcy will tell us about how we're going to take this forward. I can see you chomping at the bit, so I'm asking you, Allison, to start.
Sure. You know, and something around, I wanted just to comment about what you and Wade had said about the executive directors transitioning and elder leadership. And I wish funders would fund an elder position in every organization. I'm an enrolled citizen of the Anianwea Cherokee Nation, and we don't begin anything without permission from an elder. So how do you start a staff meeting? How do you start any kind of conversation or group function without asking permission from an elder? And an elder has to be there. And so I would love to see anyone in philanthropy step up and fund that role so that our mentors and elders in this work can gracefully let go and transition into leadership, but still be available to share their wisdom and expertise and experience with younger folks. I think around approaches to dealing with like the sense of pace and urgency, I think as younger folks, we do feel that sense of urgency. Being with elders helps me to slow down, look at deep time. I teach a lot about the 13.8 billion year history of the universe. And when I look at things over 14 billion years, it gives me a peace of mind of, we humans have been on here for such a short time. But then in terms of movement work and organizing and seeing the elders who are dealing with the same situation, it slows me down a little bit. It's, the wisdom to know when to go fast and when to go slow, when to play big, when to play small. And around cultural differences, race, age, gender, I think you can't have enough, anti-oppression training and really looking at all forms of oppression and this like wokeness competition. I find that a lot of elders may not have the exact same language or understanding around some issues, especially around queerness and gender identity, and just meeting them where they are and educating them to get them up to speed on current language with grace and forgiveness, and knowing that everyone's doing their best at all times. And sometimes we just need help in growing in that. And as a white presenting woman, I have to do the same around race, and as an able-bodied person, the same thing around people who have different abilities. So having some grace and understanding and being willing to support each other and finding supports within people of the same demographic as you are to help you grow and do that inner work so you don't cause harm within a movement or an organization.
Thanks so much. Final comments from Sam, Wade?
Go ahead, Sam, I'll follow you.
Well, I agree with all of your reflections, Alison, and I think that meeting people where they are is a very interdisciplinary process, and it's like you never know what people's developmental level is going to be on one specific area or one specific responsibility. And I think that's one of the problems that I see at age 27 when I go into the professional workforce is this kind of like outdated criteria for experience, when sometimes I will be working with very dynamic teams, including the UN and other institutions and big philanthropies with Bloomberg, Rockefeller, and then I'm like the only person that is under 30 in the room, and everyone is like, oh my God, you did this great. Oh my God, yes, this is perfect. Oh yeah, Sam will do it. Oh yeah. And they're like, well, does that mean that I should be being paid more than all of you? How does that work? So it's like, I think it's a little bit confusing for young people sometimes to explain what their experience level is and how, like, I could now come and teach every company how to use ChatGPT and, make everything 70% faster, you know what I mean? And someone else might not necessarily have that type of development technique. So I think not about being easy to being patronizing. It's about really unpacking very carefully. Okay, asking questions, which is something that I have to learn myself constantly. Is like, okay, how do I ask open-ended questions and deconstruct my own assumptions and bias? Because everyone has bias and assumptions inherently, explicitly, implicitly, indirectly, directly. Any kind of bias is present in the workplace, and not recognizing it is not doing a favor to your team or your organization. So I think learning how to ask questions and how to adapt situational leadership is definitely very important in intergenerational advocacy and movement building.
Thanks, Sam. Wade, I want to give you a minute.
I'll close quickly.
I want to get to Wendy, to Marcy.
I'll close quickly. Look, I was fortunate to have led a coalition, and it was a civil and human rights coalition of great renown. But what was important for me is the coalition process invariably exposes you to individuals well beyond your cohort and those who bring differing levels of experience to the table in ways that help enrich the broader conversation. So for organizations that operate in silos, there's a disadvantage unless you are broadening your perspective by engaging in coalition with other groups. Now, what that means, I'll let you figure that out. But what it requires is a willingness to move outside of your comfort zone to frame issues in a way that attract workers from different perspectives in a way that strengthens what you're trying to accomplish. So Gara, in light of time, I'll stop there and let you proceed in closing us out.
Well, thanks, Wade. I'm going to turn it over to Marcy. I'll just say that I live in a co-generational household when I'm in New York with my grandchildren upstairs. And so when we're done, I'm taking them to the playground. So that's my further contribution to cogeneration on this fine spring afternoon. Thank you all very, very much. Marcy?
I'm going to just give a quick goodbye and a bunch of thank yous. I hope that after today's conversation, everyone in this Zoom is feeling more inspired to tackle the cogenerational challenges and seize the opportunities that we all know are out there. My eyes were opened a lot, not just from today's webinar, but really being a fly on the wall in some incredible conversations with all of you. It's been really an honor. Gara, it's been amazing to be your thought partner in this project, and I'm interested in seeing where we can go from here to make some of the stuff you talked about a reality and not just a dream of ours. And Wade and Allison and Sam, I look forward to continuing to learn from all of you. And I just want to thank Duncan, who turned his camera off, but Duncan, make sure that all our webinars run off without a glitch. And we really appreciate all that you do here. We have two co-sponsors for this event, thanks to Gara. We have the Raben Group and Leadership for Democracy and Social Justice, which I know both put the word out, and we really appreciate that. People have asked if there will be a recording of this. After all of our webinars, we send out the recording and any relevant links. So we'll be brainstorming the links we want to share to help you deepen your cogenerational social justice work. Keep an eye out for future events. And I just want to give you one save the date, which is May 22nd, 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific. We'll be holding our signature event of the year. It's called The Power of Together, which will feature our 15 innovation fellows, including Sam Rubin. So look out for that. And till next time, be well.